So nah, honey, I'm good. There we go. Good morning. Today is Sunday, July the 10th, 2022. Another beautiful day is upon us. Man, I gotta work on the lighting in here. Another beautiful day is upon us. Thank you for those of you who've joined me by a seminar, and or to those of you who may join me on YouTube. It's been a strange week. See, we've entered July. I think for a lot of people, a lot of working people, anyways, July and into August is kind of what we call the summer doldrums. It's time in the year where things tend to slow down. People take vacations. Some businesses, certainly like the productive manufacturing style businesses, a lot of them will shut down. They'll take summer breaks. Around the world in countries like Italy and Germany, businesses shut down for several weeks at this period in time, what they call the summer shutdown. And so things kind of slow down, at least from a business perspective. First and foremost, there are always opportunities to do business and to be improving and growing. And so the fact that some lazy people in Italy, Germany, or even here take time off doesn't mean you need to. Now, maybe those people aren't being lazy. Maybe they're being prudent or smart, right? There's no need to burn yourself out or overexert yourself. No matter how important your mission is, you need to sleep, you need to rest, you need to take care of yourself, right? So there's no use going out to a battlefield as trained as you've ever been, but running on 1 hour's sleep. It's ideally you want to be out there as trained as you can be and prepared with the sleep and the nutrition and the everything else that goes into being at peak performance, right? So for some people, that's a strategy that works for them. For other people, I think for the majority of people, this kind of taking all this time off stuff is a real momentum destroyer. Really sucks the momentum out of us. And momentum is one of those really key concepts, I think, for success at anything in life, right? When asked once how he has managed to remain so productive and funny and relevant, Jerry Seinfeld responded that it's very simple for him. He just never breaks the chain, right? And excuse me. What he meant by that is that he has a calendar. Just one of those every day gets square calendars, and every day he has a challenge for himself, which is he has to write. I can't remember if it was a joke or if it's for 10 minutes. I don't know. He's a comedian, right? So his job fundamentally is writing things. So his challenge to himself is every day he's going to write for 10 minutes at a minimum. And if he has done 10 minutes of writing, he gets to put an X on his calendar. And so he has a chain of X's that go back, in his case, for years, where he has not missed an appointment with himself to do that fundamental thing, right? To focus on the fundamentals and to recommit himself to, doing those things which make him successful. And we can all learn from this. And of course, he explains in his anecdote, right, that he has not been perfect. It has not always gone unbroken, right? That there have been periods in his life where, for one reason or another, he didn't get to it that day, right? But then he was in a position to see that he had broken this streak of this accountability streak, right? And so he could redouble his efforts and get back to it the next day, right? And so through this process, very, very simple, right? There's nothing, it's not rocket science, it's nothing complicated or difficult, right? Through this very, very simple process, he uh, has been able to string together years and years, if not perhaps decades, of productive time focused on this fundamental task that is kind of the cornerstone or the key to taking him towards his desired outcome or his desired goal. And I mean, I think that's the secret to success for most people and for most endeavors. And I do wonder sometimes if, having this holiday and that holiday and this time off and that time off distracts people from focusing on that continuous effort and improvement, right? Those interruptions and distractions cause people to be unfocused. And I don't know, right? It's obviously going to be different for everybody. Like I said, I definitely see the value in taking some time for yourself and to refocus and recharge and et cetera, et cetera. I think you should probably do that on your terms instead of being told by the government when you work and when you don't. But this is obviously the world that we live in, right? And for your average person who is not financially independent and hasn't, to borrow a term from Andrew Tate, hasn't escaped the matrix. These are the realities that they have to deal with, or that we have to deal with, right? But I do think we can all take advantage and position ourselves to be as successful as we can. Obviously, I think with all of life's endeavors, there's an aspect or an element of competition that is pretty unavoidable. It's just kind of the nature of things, and so we kind of run up against that sometimes. And when we do, that's weird. Oh, that's extra weird. Hold on a second here. Sorry, it says I've got people trying to join the seminar. But I don't see the. I don't know if something's gone wrong or. Hang on a second. Maybe I've got it here. Anyways, there's an element of competition to everything that we do in life, right? Investing is no different. You're competing for a limited number of properties, a limited number of stocks, a limited number of positions, a limited number of opportunities, if you will. And there are so many that the competition isn't incredibly fierce, but it exists, right? And so the question then becomes, who are you? Okay, hold on, there we go. Who are you competing against, and what are they bringing to the table that is different from what you bring to the table, right? And that can be a bit of a challenge to navigate. I'm sorry, hold on a second. I'm just trying to figure out what's happening here. So SBOAHQHJWX, which is different from, well, that explains that. Okay. One second. So I had a computer crash this morning. It wasn't a computer crash actually. Windows 10 decided that it was going to do an update right while I was getting ready for the seminar. And I am not sure exactly what happened to my poor little laptop here, but either the update did something to restart the computer or the update did something to drain the computer's battery, one of the two. And it that makes a lot more sense now. This morning, while I was preparing for the seminar, I wonder how much trouble this has caused, because now things are starting to make sense. This morning, when I was preparing for the seminar, my computer, actually Microsoft, decided it was time to restart and update my computer or something. I'm not too sure. And in the process, instead of restarting my computer, it seemed to just kill it dead. It just lost all power. I had to plug it in. So I guess it had a low battery when Windows decided to do this update or whatever. I hate that Windows does this stuff, but anyways. And so it turned off the computer and I had to restart everything. But I'd already set up. I'd already scheduled in the seminar, the Google Meet chat. I'd already scheduled it in, and then the computer crashed or failed or whatever. And so I restarted the computer and I was working through getting everything going. And obviously the email I had already sent. And so I didn't notice, I guess, when the computer reloaded, Google assigned me a new Meet code. And so, anyways, whatever link I had sent out was not working properly because it had changed. So my apologies. Microsoft has a terribly customer hostile business policy of forcing you to get updates against your will whenever they think that they want to give them to you. And it probably won't be good for their business long term, but they're doing it because a lot of people are not good with computers. And so I guess they feel it's better to inconvenience some people with mild BS updates than to have most people, due to their own ignorance and stupidity, be exposed to cybersecurity risks. And that's a really, really hard equation to balance, just because, well, cybersecurity threats are a problem, and they can even be a problem. I mean, if you've heard of the concept of bot farms or those types of things, a bunch of idiots who don't understand how to secure their computers. And to be fair, you don't need to be an idiot to not understand how to secure your computer. There's lots of people who just, computers are not really their interest. They don't invest the energy there. Well, bot farm is just a bunch of computers that weren't very secure that hackers have managed to get into, right? And then they can point all 100 or 1,000 or million of those machines at one task, right? Like trying to brute force your email password or something like that. So I understand. I understand where they're coming from. I think they might be misguided in what they're doing, and I don't think they're maybe looking at the long term. But I have a passage that I'd actually like to share with you. It's from the Daily Stoic. So I've read you some passages from here before. So fantastic book. But in it, he's got a quote here from Musonius Rufus. And Musonius Rufus was a Roman philosopher and I believe merchant. I think that was his story. Anyways, he says, I believe a good king is from the outset and by necessity a philosopher, and the philosopher is from the outset a kingly person. Philosopher and philosophy are words that I think get confused and turned around a lot, but what he's saying is obviously philosophy, right? Love of knowledge, the study of life, however you want to define it. I mean, it is literally translates as the love of knowledge. is a good guide for leadership, because a lot of the times when you're in a position of leadership, the answer is not clear and simple as A plus B equals C or 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? Oftentimes, the answer is a balance, right? It's a trade-off, or a balance of trade-offs, and you are the person who needs to decide between those trade-offs, right? And it's hard to make trade-off based decisions unless you know what your priorities are, right? And it is difficult to know what your priorities are if you don't understand what your underlying or your guiding philosophy is, right? So I guess his argument, and this is an argument that is actually older than Musonius Rufus, but the argument goes that one should study their philosophies, their motivating reasons, their underlying reasons, right? So that when presented with trade-offs, they understand what their priorities are and can therefore select the path that best aligns with their trade-offs. And so this is about leadership, right? And so I would tie that back to Microsoft, right? Probably all tech companies, in my opinion, in the year 2022, but certainly Microsoft. I think this is a company that has a crisis of leadership, in the sense that they have as a guiding principle. I think they have as a guiding principle making money. I think that's it, and avoiding lawsuits, right? Which is oftentimes the guiding principle for large corporations. And unfortunately, as we've seen time and time again, large corporations that are guided by those particular incentives don't actually end up doing good things for the world, right? We have like large banks, people hate the banks. Large insurance companies, people hate the insurance companies. We have large automotive manufacturers, people aren't too fond of them either, right? These big corporations that have been around and existed for a long time, and essentially any influence that the owners and founders had on those companies has long since been eroded away, and now they essentially exist as these just market entities with very, very corporate sanitized leadership. Oftentimes they get away from their mission of creating value for their customers, because they're so hyper focused on A, avoiding liability, and then B, just driving up that profit line as much as possible. And again, I'm not knocking them for wanting to avoid liability or for increasing profits, because that is how you make money. But I do think sometimes it causes us to make counterproductive decisions, right? In the case of Microsoft, like, I have been a lifelong Windows user. I've never used a Mac. I don't like them. I've dabbled with Linux, but I prefer Windows. It's what I've always known, what I know very well, and I'm very good with computers. So even though I'd be comfortable on a Mac or a Linux computer, I like Microsoft. And for years now, at least for 3 or 4 years since they've introduced this crap with Windows 10, I sit down all the time when my computer does stuff like this. I think to myself, maybe I should switch to a Mac. Maybe I should get Linux. And so in the short term, this is a business decision that Microsoft has made, that they think, okay, well, I'm going to avoid liability, right? People aren't going to come to me complaining their computers are having trouble, because I'm going to force them to update. So it's a good strategy to protect grandmothers. It is a good strategy. But the trade-off is you're gonna annoy young tech-savvy people who know exactly how to use your product and what they want from it, and you're not delivering it to them, because you're forcing a solution that's tailored towards grandmothers, for example, onto these people. And of course, the real users and the real value for your product is the young people, not the grandmothers, right? The grandmothers, A, don't like computers very much, don't use them that much, aren't going to buy that many of them. B, they're not going to be around that long relative to the young people. And C, it's, for the most part, it's not going to be the 60 and 70-year-old cohort who's going to go out and start a business and have to buy 100 computers for their employees. It's going to be the younger people, right? And so if you're annoying those people with your strategy today to kind of preempt an issue, then where down the line does that pay dividends for you, right? And we've seen this case study with many businesses in the past that actually it doesn't pay dividends. This sort of short-term, short-sighted thinking results in businesses that have market dominance suddenly finding themselves on the back foot and sometimes eventually obsoleted, right? Currently, the most valuable automotive company in the world is Tesla. They don't make the most cars, not even close. In fact, Tesla is more valuable than probably the big three automotive firms put together, who do make the vast majority of cars. It's crazy when you actually look at the valuation that Tesla has. Why is Tesla so valuable? Well, they make something that the other companies thought and publicly stated was not possible to make because they did not have an interest in catering to the market that Tesla chose to cater to. And the problem with their way of thinking was that they were old businesses catering to an old mindset that was centered around old people, which is fine. And sometimes old mindsets are the best mindsets. Not every new idea is a good idea. But when you as an investor or they as a business are inflexible in what possibilities or what options in the marketplace you'll consider, right, then the opportunity for competition to come in and put you on the back foot and potentially bankrupt you is very, very real. Right? It's very, very real. So anyways, that's very, very long-winded aside about what happened this morning. I'm really not too sure, but it looks like we've got things kind of working better now. Definitely annoying when you have computer troubles. Getting back to what I was talking about before I got distracted here with people joining the seminar. In July, we got the jobs report for last month's job growth or economic activity in Canada. And for the first month of the year, we reported a jobs decline or an employment decline in Canada. Almost 40,000 jobs were lost. Interestingly, this 40,000 job decrease in the workforce was accompanied by a decrease in the unemployment rate. As more Canadians became structurally unemployed or stopped looking for work altogether, then did lose their jobs. It's very interesting. Hopefully you know already how the unemployment rate is calculated, but in case you don't, let me give you just a quick overview. The government, and this is true of all governments, so maybe saying the government's not fair, just economists in general, the way that they calculate the unemployment rate is not to take the total number of available workers and then divide the number of working workers over that number, right, to give you a ratio of working to available to work workers and thus the unemployment rate. That would be simple and that would make sense. And I'm sure that's what most people imagine the unemployment rate represents, but it is not, in fact, what the unemployment rate represents. Instead, they use these nebulous figures based on surveys to determine how many people are actively looking for work. And then only those people plus those people currently employed are counted in the available for work denominator, right? The numerator remains always just the number of people who are actively employed. And of course, we don't count people who have illegal jobs. And, you know, if you're a drug dealer, you don't get counted, et cetera, et cetera. So these sorts of illegitimate jobs obviously don't get counted for the numerator. And then for the denominator, we would not be counting people who have under the table jobs and therefore are not looking but do have a source of employment. But we also don't count people who absolutely would work, but due to market conditions, they have lost or cannot find a job, and they have become so discouraged by this fact that they've given up hope of finding a job. And therefore, they are what we would call structurally unemployed or long-term unemployment. Those people are removed from the denominator. And so therefore, if you look at the unemployment stats, right, you'll see weird phenomena like last month's stats where our economy lost jobs, but the unemployment rate went down because we just eliminated more people from the denominator than people lost jobs. And so unemployment rates are very tricky. It's a tricky economic metric because it cannot be. It has value as an indicator of what is happening in the economy, but it is not an accurate or a truly reflective indicator, because of the way in which it is subject to statistical manipulation, right? And you will see this. I mean, obviously, you have to have an interest in economics, because otherwise you won't look at these things. But if you look closely at most of the economic indicators that are used by the media and the government to tell you about what is happening in the economy, almost all of them are like the unemployment rate. They're Orwellian in name. That is, they are called something that they really are not, right? Because the unemployment rate does not actually represent the unemployment rate, because of the way that it's statistically derived. And, there's an argument that it has to be done that way, because there are people who are of working age and are physically able, but they don't need to work. Maybe they're wealthy, independently wealthy, retired investors. There's all sorts of people we can imagine, outliers, who aren't employed and don't want to be, right? And so it would be weird to say that they're unemployed. If you're making $500,000 from your investment income and you choose not to have a job, you are, for all intents and purposes, unemployed, right? And so you are for all intents and purposes unemployed, but you're not unemployed. That's not what we mean when we say, we have an unemployment rate of X, Y, and Z, right? You are a person who's doing just fine, right? So it's tricky. These things and all of these statistical measures are tricky. They're tricky in part because statistics, like science, like pretty much anything really that depends on a large number of people and disparate knowledge, requires trust. It requires honesty, and it requires humility. And when these things aren't in place in a society or in the culture of an organization, then these measures can be misleading, to say the least. They can be outright lies. To quote Mark Twain, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? And obviously what he was getting at there is that the biggest kind of lie people tell is the statistical lie. And I think that is probably true. People bring out statistics all the time, especially in the political context. And it's not to say that their statistics are wrong, but usually their statistics are completely without context. And oftentimes when you see the context of those statistics, you recognize that they don't describe what they're being used to demonstrate to you, right? So again, unemployment. Your average person hears that, takes it at face value that it is the unemployment rate, and then assumes that means that this is the rate of people who don't have jobs, but would like them, and versus people who have jobs. And of course, that's not what it is. That's not what it's measuring at all, right? Because there are plenty of people who would take jobs, but the economic conditions are such that they haven't been able to find one, and after a while they get discouraged and say, forget it, I'll just remain unemployed and try and figure it out some other way. And those people, your average person would assume, are counted by unemployment stats when in fact they are not. Okay, anyways, so we've seen this jobs decline, and we've seen this unemployment decrease. And I think that this is just another indicator of which direction the economy is headed in. Obviously, we've seen over the last, 2 months, the stock market and the cryptocurrency markets just being absolutely hammered. And now we're getting the negative unemployment reports. And I think we're going to continue to see that for a few more months. And in a couple months, we'll be calling this the recession of 2022. It's a very interesting time in the world. There's a large increase in instability. Did you know that the former Japanese prime minister was assassinated this week? Shinzo Abe was shot to death, killed while campaigning in Japan. It looks like it was a lone gunman. Nobody really knows the why yet. But he shot and killed him. Shinzo Abe, for those of you who don't know, it was not the prime minister. He's the former prime minister of Japan. He is the longest serving prime minister in Japanese democratic history. He served for, I don't know, maybe close to 10, 12 years, something like that. He's been in and out of office, so it wasn't one continuous run. But anyways, he was a bit of a reformer. He wanted to increase Japan's military independence while simultaneously increasing their military and economic interdependence excuse me, with the United States. It's an interesting position that most Japanese people, sorry, I shouldn't say most, but there was a large contingent of Japanese people who were not in favor of his position. Their primary argument went something along the lines of blah, 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 the Americans pay for our defense, so why should we? Which is definitely a very, very reasonable argument. If somebody else is going to do something for you, why would you do it for yourself? But also not, right? So it's interesting because he obviously didn't believe that. He thought that the Japanese should be responsible and capable of their own defense. And just so we're clear, Japan is very capable of defending itself, even though they are not a militarized nation. Make no mistake, they are quite the military power all the same. But it is interesting. It does point to some geopolitical instability. And obviously, one has to wonder if political leaders are being assassinated, if there are larger powers at play. I can think of one nation that is very close to Japan that would very much like for them to have less close ties with the United States and to be less interested in developing their ability to defend themselves militarily. I won't name names. Simultaneously, we've seen the departure of the British Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who stepped down for reasons I don't know or care about. But he's also left that country in a moment of political flux. And there are periods throughout history where things like this happen. And usually they go hand in hand with bad economic times. And of course, it does look like that's what we're about to enter into. And so we're entering a period of high polarization. I think we all already feel it in domestic politics. You certainly see that. Certainly with, for example, that Roe versus Wade thing in the United States, where we have a bunch of crazy lefty people who don't do any research, who think that that was a ban of abortion. It was not. It was actually a repeal of really, really bad case law, and abortions are still legal in most of the places where they were legal before. But you see that, right? Because you've got these people who are hyper polarized. They think, oh, the Americans are banning abortion. They're evil. They're this, they're that. And they haven't done any research, right? And conversely, on the other hand, you have this sort of resurgence or this reassertion, at least a little bit, in that Roe versus Wade case of the states' rights and some of the more traditional roles certain polities were playing in American politics, right? Certainly, we saw a very similar thing, right, a few years ago with the Brexit, right, where Boris Johnson pushed through the Brexit, the exit of the United Kingdom from the European Union. And so we're seeing this sort of increase in polarization, this increase in divisiveness, this leave me alone sort of reflex, as we've seen, I think, a lot of overreach by these governing and intergovernmental bodies. And that's caused tension, right? Really quickly, the reason why economics and investing and freedom are so beautiful is because in a free market where actors behave morally, right? So that means in a free market where you're free to do what you want, I'm free to do what I want, but we both agree we won't do anything immoral. So I'm not going to hurt you. There's no physical violence, right? There's no coercion. In a free market, the only way for you to get me to do what you want me to do, or vice versa, is for us to come to a mutually beneficial trade or agreement, right? So for example, I want you to come, I don't know, to my restaurant and cook for my guests, right? And I say to you, will you come and cook for me for $15 an hour? And you say yes, or you say no. And if it's worth $15 of your time, you come and you cook. And if it isn't, then you don't. I don't send men with guns to take your money. I do not send men with guns to force you to join my army. I do not send men with guns to tell you that if you don't pay me, I'm going to lock you into a small cage, right? You are free to choose, and you make a decision that benefits you, and I make a decision that benefits me, right? I'm going to pay you because I believe that I'm better off with an hour of your time than with $15 of my money. And you're going to accept that money because you feel that you're better off with the $15 than with the hour of free time, et cetera, and vice versa. Apply that to every scenario. And so when there is freedom, when there's an absence of coercion, right, relationships are formed that glue people together because those relationships are mutually beneficial, right? You are essentially my friend, my business partner, even my employer, but we're in it together because we both benefit, right? And we all know that this is true because probably all of us work. You have a mutually beneficial relationship with your employer. Now, you may not feel that it is coercion free, right? And we live in a society that has lots of coercion in it. So you may feel very much coerced to have your job. Certainly, if nothing else, you're being coerced by the government to pay a bunch of never-ending taxes that you maybe wouldn't require such a high-paying job if you didn't have to pay all those taxes, right? But that is the situation. At the end of the day, you are free to quit your job, right? And your employer cannot send men with guns after you, right? You're free to change your job, do whatever. And so a voluntary market creates win-win situations where everybody feels good about the outcome. And so it minimizes conflict. Which is not to say it gets rid of it. Nothing gets rid of conflict. Humans are humans and we're crappy. So there's no avoiding that. And some of us, forget even crappy, some of us are straight up insane, right? Some people are crazy lunatics. So there's no avoiding conflict. There's only minimizing it. But that's what the free market does. It minimizes conflict. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if you have coercion, right? If we have politics, for example, right? Then any decision that's made by the polity comes with coercion, right? One of the fundamental things that we all need to understand about the government and about politics in general, right, is everything that the government does, every single thing, period, full stop, at the end of the day is enforced by a man with a gun, right? People talk about the government and they use this language that completely obfuscates what it is and what it does, right? And they act as if like, oh, you know what? We should just pass a law because it'll make the world better. And it's like, yes, sure, maybe, but every law you pass involves a man with a gun forcing people to do things that they may or may not want to do, right? And when you force people to do things, you do not have a win-win. You have a win-lose situation, right? And win-lose situations are very bad for stability because people don't like to lose. And when you create win-lose situations, you create winners and losers. And what I find very interesting just looking at the world is you can see very clearly, because we have a rather high coercion society right now, right? It's relatively, we have a decent amount of freedom in certain superficial ways and a real lack of freedom in other more fundamental, and I would argue probably more important ways that people feel, even if they don't quite understand, you know, where the freedom was lost and what it is that they're after. And you see a lot of people are angry. People are angry at capitalism. They're angry at big business. They're angry at big pharma. They're angry at big tech. They're angry at this. They're angry at that. The gays are angry at the straights. The straights are angry at the gays. The trans are angry at the cis. Blah, 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 right? Everybody's angry. The blacks at the whites at the blacks, the yellows at the reds, whatever. Everybody's upset about something or other, right? And I find it very fascinating that all of this upsetness, interestingly, derives from initially the government, but for some reason, because people don't really understand how these laws and how these market forces interact in an incredibly complex world, and I mean, truly nobody does because you can't, right? It's interesting to see how this anger is very misguided and it gets pointed in the wrong direction, right? I'm like truly fascinating. But you see this, right? And so as we're looking at the world currently, right, and you're thinking about investing and how to allocate your resources, whether it's in real estate or maybe you're using stocks or cryptocurrencies or please don't be using NFTs, but whatever. There's so many different vehicles, right, for investment and for strategy moving forward. One of the things that you should keep in mind is that as coercion continues to increase, and that's what it's going to do, because that's the trend. And historically, it's been very rare for societies to go the other direction. Usually you just take more freedom away, more freedom away, more freedom away, more freedom away. But you reach a breaking point where people become upset. And the point I was trying to get at by saying it's interesting how people misdirect their anger is people become upset, but it doesn't mean they become upset at the right thing. They just become upset. And eventually this leads to conflict, but not necessarily the correct conflict, right? You're not necessarily angry at the right people. I'm going to take an example. Black Lives Matter. We obviously saw them burning stuff down a year or two ago. And obviously there's a community of people who are very upset. Now, I would argue that a lot of these are misguided white people who don't know what they're talking about or what they're doing, and they just like to burn things and they get a catharsis out of destroying stuff. I'd argue that that's a large contingent of that sort of group of people. But nonetheless, there's a real palpable anger there, right? And what I think is fascinating about that is that BLM coalesces into this movement where people are burning down cities and protesting and whatever, and they want to get rid of the police and they want this and that and the third, right? Meanwhile, really and truly, the troubles of the Black inner city community or whatever in the United States, and that's primarily where the trouble is, their primary problems in life are probably the existence of the American welfare system, the existence of the American abortion system, and in general, the increase over the last 50 or 60 years of incentives to remove or destroy nuclear families and replace them with these weird hybrid models where the government becomes the father. That's created most of that community's problems. It was the locus or the impetus behind the crack epidemic of the 80s and early 90s. It has continued to be a force for the gang problem ever since. And you see actually case studies all over the world of where basically the destruction of family structure results in young people growing up alienated from their communities and their societies, and rather than focusing on their own self-improvement and making themselves better and improving their lives, they become instead obsessed with quick pathways, short-sighted or narrow pathways towards success and status, which might take on the form of drug dealing or other antisocial behaviors, right? And it's been very destructive and very, very deleterious. But you'll notice that all of the anger came out and it was directed towards the police, right? You can go ask any old Black people. Ask any old Black people. I dare you to just walk down the street and ask some old Black people and ask them if the police are the biggest problem in their life. And most of them will tell you no. And in fact, a lot of them will not only tell you that the police aren't a problem, but that they'd actually like it if there were more police around because there's a bunch of young people doing stupid stuff. These are the facts, right? So people's frustration can end up being misplaced and targeting the wrong things that they perhaps perceive to be the cause of that frustration, but that aren't actually the cause of that frustration, right? Now, when we look at the world where coercion seems to be more and more the norm, and I don't need to give you examples. I think we're all pretty clear on certain ways in which the government just keeps asking for more, inviting themselves more and more into our lives. The interesting question is, where and when does the frustration with those governmental oversteps boil out, and where does it boil over to, right? Does it result in some sort of conflict, right? Obviously, we live in a world today, right, in 2022, where we are very much afraid of conflict. Our ancestors were not afraid of conflict. I mean, I'm sure everybody at some level has always feared conflict because there's the chance that you will die or your friends or loved ones will perish. Conflict is not good. It's certainly not the desirable outcome. But prior to the dropping of bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as societies, we more or less said, well, sometimes young men are going to die so that we can figure out conflicts, essentially. And after that, as societies, we've really kind of turned away from conflict. Obviously, there are still wars in the world. There are still conflicts. And certainly, if you're a powerful nation like the United States or Russia, you can bully a less powerful nation like Afghanistan, Iraq, or the Ukraine into doing, what you want. But in general, we've avoided conflict because in reality, if Russia were to go to war with America, we would all lose. There's no winners in that conflict. It's only losers. And so I think as societies, we have stepped away from conflict. Where conflicts would have occurred before, we've allowed things, trespasses, whatever, disagreements to go further than we previously would have, because nobody wants to deal with the consequences of a conflict of that nature, right? And yet it is human nature that no matter how good you make things, if you push people and you allow that frustration to build, eventually it's going to come out and express itself. And so it's very curious to see how and when that will happen. On Friday, we experienced, some of us, for those of you who use Rogers for your cellular or home services, or perhaps the businesses that you frequent do, they had a major outage, right? All of their systems and services were down for almost 24 hours, I guess maybe for 18 hours, something like that, for the whole Friday business day, basically. And it caused a lot of havoc, right? Obviously, you couldn't go to the gas station in some cases and pay for gas because they didn't have a way to charge you. You couldn't, contact your bank. You couldn't do all sorts of things that normally we would do, and that happened in the course of a business day because their network was down. Interac wasn't working, right? So you couldn't even pay debit money out of your bank account. Money that you have, you couldn't give it to somebody else because of their problem, right? Pardon me. So we saw firsthand how inconvenient it would be if things stopped working, even just for a day. And of course, it's not clear. Rogers really has not been transparent up until this point with exactly what happened. Chances are there was some minor problem or error that occurred with their network. Perhaps a software update on some of their primary infrastructure that just went really horribly wrong. And I'm sure some engineers made some mistakes in order for the problem to get as far as it did, right? But we saw this, right? And one of my thoughts is perhaps this is the beginning of some conflict, perhaps between the West and Russia. Obviously, for the last few months, we've been sending millions and in some cases billions of dollars worth of weapons and support to the Ukraine for them to fight the Russians. If you drive past Pearson Airport right now, you can see the Russian cargo jet that has been impounded there by the Canadian government. It's a Russian jet, belongs to Russia, doesn't belong to us, it belongs to some Russian person. And it's a very expensive and unique jet. I think there's only like 2 or 3 of them in the world. And it was here to deliver or pick something up, I don't know. And then this conflict started and we were like, no, we're not going to give you back your plane. It's ours now, or at least until you do what we tell you to do. So there's another example of coercion. And, one has to wonder, right? How long can we push Russia like that before Russia pushes back, right? Maybe that's what happened on Friday. I don't know. Anyways, all of this is to say that there is quite a bit of uncertainty, I guess, looming ahead of us. There's quite a bit of uncertainty. Now, uncertainty is bad for business in the sense that it is harder to make plans into an uncertain future. And that's what businesses do. They plan out the future. When we sit down and we analyze a property, we're trying to plan out the future. How much is it going to cost us for repairs? How much is it going to cost us for utilities? How much is it going to cost us for pity, right? Versus how much are we going to collect in rent? How much vacancy are we going to experience, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to predict the future, right? And obviously that's a very tricky thing because, if we sit there and say, hey, in the future, we're going to have a 2.5% vacancy rate, and then the area in which we're investing in experiences, I don't know, massive freak flooding that doesn't damage our property, let's say, but it destroys several bridges and roads into the municipality, and now people can't get there. You might end up with a 15% vacancy rate, right? You don't know how long that problem might persist for. And so uncertainty makes it much, much harder to do that calculus, because obviously if you know for a fact it's going to be a 3% vacancy rate, you pay one price. But if you're not sure if it'll be a 3% or a 15% vacancy rate, you need to budget for at least the average possibility, if not the worst case scenario, right? Because you're not trying to lose money. So now let's just say you budget for that 15% vacancy rate, but you end up only experiencing 3%, and all of your competition budgets for 3%. Well, then they're going to be cheaper than you are. So you're going to have the most expensive product on the market. And so again, you're going to lose, right? So uncertainty makes it very, very difficult to do business. And it looks like we're entering a period of uncertainty. And so if you owned a firm that made guns or butter or cars, then you would certainly you'd be entering this period of time with a great deal of trepidation. As a micro investor, right, as somebody who's investing just for yourself or maybe for your family or maybe even for your extended family, but not beyond that, right? That makes you a micro investor. You're not an institution or anything like that, or a business. You should not worry as much. One, because on the micro level, it is easier to make solid predictions. Again, vacancy rate might be a little difficult to predict, but for the most part, you can understand one single building, one single house, and how it should perform in the context of rental, right, compared to an entire economy. It's a much easier thing to understand, and so you should be able to do that. Also, uncertainty presents opportunity, right? We have the opportunity now, as the market becomes more and more uncertain, people will become more and more fearful. And to go back to what I was saying earlier on in this seminar about philosopher kings and understanding your underlying philosophy, right? Since most people do not understand their underlying philosophy and they haven't spent the time to understand what their priorities are, they meet uncertainty with uncertainty, right? The human instinct when faced with the unknown is to freeze, right? That's what people do, right? Freeze and panic. Those are kind of the two responses when confronted with the unknown. Well, freezing is no good. It gets you eaten by the lion, and panicking is no good. It causes you to make a lot of noise, and you might get away from the lion, but you get jumped on by the panther that was waiting in the jungle that you run to for safety, right? So those two strategies are not particularly good strategies. It is much better to have considered what your priorities are, to have weighed them, and then to be making decisions based on those priorities, right? So if your priority is, hey, you know what? Now, obviously, everybody's in different stages. If your priority is, hey, I'm saving up right now, I'm putting away, $500 a month, $250 a month, $2,000 a month, $5,000 a month, whatever it is, right? Then you've got to keep doing that, right? If your priority is, well, I'm in the acquisitions phase, I'm trying to acquire property, well, then are you doing an analysis? Are you looking at properties, what's available, what's out there, right? If you're in the consolidation phase, maybe you've acquired some properties, but you've got to do renovations, you've got to do maintenance work, you've got to get them tenanted, etc. Then what's your focus there? And on and on and on, right? And so at the start of this seminar, I don't know if you guys were on it yet, I was talking about Jerry Seinfeld and how his philosophy is don't break the chain, right? Do that small fundamental task every day that will create your success, right? And so every day he spends, I believe it was 10 minutes at a minimum, writing comedy, right? That's his fundamental practice, the fundamental thing that he needs to do to ensure he's at peak performance, right? That he's ready to go when he steps onto the stage or onto his TV show set, whatever it is, right? Similarly, right, for you, what is that thing? I was listening to a gentleman. He's a multi-millionaire. 50, $100 million, something like that. Successful businessman in the UK, and he was saying every day he gets up and he checks his bank account. How much money does he have? Now, I think personally that that's a little bit obsessive and not necessarily the way I live my life. But for him, it is important. It is a fundamental to know how he's doing financially. Is he going up or down in any given day, right? And then to plan accordingly. I think that we should all be doing the same thing. Perhaps it's not a daily check-in that we need to do. Perhaps it is a weekly or a monthly. But we should definitely, you should know how much money you have, what your credit score is, whether or not you're going to get approved for a loan. If you don't know, then you lack financial awareness, right? And similarly, like you should know how long does it take you to run 5 kilometers, right? Or 1 kilometer or whatever, right? Like you should have fitness metrics. If you have fitness goals, you have fitness metrics. How much can you lift? What's your 1 rep max? How far can you run? What's your VO2 max? How far can you jump? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's your vertical max, et cetera, right? These are things that you would know. And if you're an athlete, you know a lot more of them than if you're a normal person. But whatever, if you have fitness goals of any sort, whether they're athletic professional ones or just regular aesthetic normal person ones, you need to know these things and track them so that you can follow them and improve on them and make decisions around them, right? Certainly, if you are trying to lose weight and last week you gained a pound, then this week when your buddies invite you out to get some Five Guys, maybe you don't go, or you just get the fries, or I have no idea what they serve there, but you just have a drink, whatever it is to kind of cut down on your calories. So similarly, if you have financial goals, right? Financial goals are always tricky because there's always a good reason to spend your money. Maybe your goal is to save $2,000 a month, but it's July, it's wedding season. Maybe you've been invited to several weddings, and those things are friggin' expensive, and maybe that ends up costing you, I don't know, $800, and you really could only afford to go maybe $200 to one wedding, but you have lots of friends and family and whatever, so you go to 8 and you end up spending, or 4 and you end up spending $800, whatever, and so now you're $600 over budget or under on your savings, right? Well, now if you're tracking, you make that up and you stay on track and you're going to get to your goal. Whereas if you're not tracking, if you're not following, then just like the person who's mindlessly eating chips, right, and not realizing that they sat there in 20 minutes and ate a whole bag and consumed 1,500 calories, right? You, like that person, are going to do the same thing, except you're not consuming chips, you're spending money, right? And unlike the fat person who's going to accumulate fat, you are going to lose wealth, right? And so this is, I think, the most important and fundamental thing. Now, before I go, I just want to share something with you. I should have gotten to it sooner, but been waxing poetically about geopolitics because I'm a little bit concerned about what is potentially coming in the future. But anyways, yeah, okay, so you can see my screen. So I want to show you 228 Wellington Heights. Let me see if I can go back and get you the initial picture. 228 Wellington Heights is a purpose-built 5-plex in Sudbury, Ontario that is on the market. Just recently hit the market. It is a property. Almondo, if you're listening, this is a property we should consider making an offer on. But for everybody, this is the type of property that I like to look at. Right? It's a nice square, purpose-built 5-plex. All apartments are 2-bedroom apartments. It has, if I'm not mistaken, I think it has 2 vacancies. No, 1 vacancy. 1 vacancy and a bunch of like way below market rent units, like way, way below. There is somebody who is in a 2-bedroom for $732 a month plus hydro. So like way, way below market. This person wants to sell it for $1 million, which is approximately the market value for this building if it had tenants paying the market rates. It does not. So I would argue that this property is probably needs to take a pretty healthy discount, maybe $100K, maybe a bit more. I think I think that for between 50 and 100K, you could buy this house, like 50 or 100K discount. You could buy this house because my thinking is just you take all of that money as cash for keys, so you can buy out these crappy tenants and get in closer to market rent. The market rent on this property I've highlighted on the screen is supposed to be approximately 1,800 plus hydro. This building is pretty close to the hospital. It is in a much better area than my buildings in Sudbury. So I can't say for sure that this is worth $1,800 a month, but that sounds right. It's going to be closer to there. So at $1,800 a month, this property will bring in over approximately $9,000 a month in revenue. And so if we do the 1% rule, it should be worth around $900,000. In Ontario, we usually pay a premium. You never really get the 1% rule. Probably nowhere do you. It's kind of a rule of thumb. So, if you get the 0.8% rule, which this would hit, I'd say you've done really well for yourself. So this is a property that I think has a lot of potential. I think it's interesting to see this property because I think this property is priced a little bit high still, actually. But I think 6 months ago, this property would have been $1.2, $1.3 million. And so we've seen prices, I think, decline quite a bit over the past year, right? But you look at a property like this, and you can see, I'm just going to do a quick, not an analysis, I'm just going to look up my quick table for mortgage payments and just show you really, really quickly approximately what this property does. So here's my table. It's a 5-plex, so I can treat it as a residential and get a 30-year amortization. My interest rate is, let's call it 3.325. That is a very high interest rate compared to what you can get right now. But it's not crazy if things keep going up to think that that's what the interest rate will be. Like me. And the tags on this thing, they're like 76.80 or something like that. So there we go. So approximately this building at $1 million price, 30-year amortization, 3.25% interest rate. It's going to cost obviously $200,000 down, right? Your mortgage payment is going to be $3,500 a month. Your taxes, another $640 a month. Your insurance, another $175 a month. Assuming my insurance rate is correct, it's probably a little low, but a higher rate won't really affect it much. Let's call it $2,500 a year. Okay, so in total, monthly payment $4,316. So to pay for this property, obviously we haven't factored in utilities or anything like that. There's a lot more expenses, landscaping, property management, all those things. But we can see here that if you could get market rent for this property, which is about $9,000 per month, then your principal, interest, taxes, and insurance, it's around $4,300. So if we were to double that for our other expenses, right, so approximately 50% of rent usually, so that's another like $4,000. So $8,300 or so. If you bring in $900 in revenue each month, you'd be cash flowing $600, $700, maybe $800 a month on this property, possibly more. And obviously, there's a lot of long-term upside. The property was recently redone, 2021 retrofit. It's also separately metered, and it has a shared laundry, so potential for coin-op laundry. So really, it's a property that has a lot of potential upside. And again, it's the type of property that is purpose-built, right? So right now, because there's so much uncertainty in the market, you have less competition for properties like this than you usually would. Now, I think this property is going to sell pretty quickly because it looks like it shows well. The pictures look good. It's hard to argue with the value proposition. I do see some minor defects and some things that could be touched up to really improve the marketability and the curb appeal of this. Curb appeal is not the right word, but the appeal of these units. But in general, it looks like it's a good property, right? So it's one of many opportunities that are out there. We've seen prices move that we've seen valuations trend downwards, right, over the last couple of months. Certainly in the GTA, some properties have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars of value of sale price. We're seeing properties sell sometimes for $100,000 or $200,000 below their list price. We're also seeing properties selling at their list price. So not every property is experiencing that. This sort of decline in prices. And of course, this is the nature of real estate, right? Just because something happens in the market that makes it less desirable overall to buy real estate, it doesn't mean that there isn't particular properties that remain highly desirable for one reason or another, whether it's as investments or it's because people just desire to live in those areas. And so you may still see price growth and performance there. And that is, of course, one of the important things to understand. One of the key things to understand or to remember with real estate is that real estate, unlike with most things, certainly as an investment, cheaper is not necessarily better. Now, cheaper in terms of value is better, always, sure. The better value you get for your dollar is always an improvement. But sometimes it's the more expensive pieces of real estate that will be recession resistant or recession proof or et cetera, or that will appreciate better, right? Certainly, you could buy land in northern Saskatchewan for a lot cheaper than you could buy land in downtown Manhattan. Certainly, and that's even more true 50 years ago, right? And yet, if I could have given money to your ancestors 50 years ago, and a note instructing them to either spend it in New York or Saskatchewan, where would you tell them to spend the money? Same amount of money, either place. Where would you spend the money? You'd spend it in New York, right? And even though the New York real estate would be more expensive than the Saskatchewan real estate, it also had more potential to go up because people desire to be there, whereas nobody wants to be in northern Saskatchewan, right? So this is something that's important to understand. Certainly, as an investor, right? One thing is the bigger your mortgage is, the more principal recapture that you get, right? So that's a way in which you get more money. The bigger a mortgage that you can bite off and have your tenants pay for, the more money your tenants are paying to you, right? If you could qualify or get a mortgage for $100 million, that needs to have, I don't know, I'm just trying to do the math on like a 20-year term. That needs to have about $5 million paid per year or so against the mortgage. You're going to have like an $8 million a year mortgage payment, right? Of which like $3 or $4 million is going to go to you because it's going to be principal recapture, right? So bigger is better in some cases. And so that's something that, did you say something, Armando?
No, sorry, I'll wait till you finish your thought.
Okay. So bigger can be better in some cases, right? And of course, there's other advantages with the larger size or the larger price. Sometimes tax advantages, depreciation, the amount of loss you can calculate for depreciation to offset your taxable income, right? Those are other advantages that can come with it. So it's not always the case where you need to be minimizing yourself and looking for the cheap deal thing. Sometimes maybe the more expensive but better situated investment can be more advantageous, right? That was really my thought. Do you have a question, Armando, or a comment?
Yeah, I was gonna say I like that property, but their valuation to me just seems high.
Yeah,
I'm looking at it like 150 per unit because it's purpose built. I would think that would probably that's a better valuation. So I'm thinking like 850, between 850 and 875. For that type of property for me makes it more ideal. My other question, I guess, is has the other interest rate hike that they've been talking about, did that happen yet?
Has not happened yet. No.
Okay. So I like this property a lot. You think that it's gonna go fast. I don't think so. I think that
not at this price.
Well, define fast, because maybe we have different frame of reference. When you say fast, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of talking out both sides of my mouth, right? Because I did say you're not going to have a lot of competition for this property. And I think that that's true. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. I think a lot of people are kind of sitting on the sidelines right now. They're not thinking about investing. They're not thinking about getting ahead. There's this small minority of weird, crazy people like us who are, and we're not alone. There are others like us out there. But the majority of people have lost focus on those things if they had any focus on it to begin with. So I think competition for this is going to be lower than usual. when I say that it's going to be gone fast, what I mean is that I think there's obvious value in this building. I think other investors will see that as well. And so somebody's going to come along and they're going to put together a deal that works sooner rather than later. It's not going to sit on the market for 6 months, right? I would agree with your evaluation that the price that I would aim to pay for this property is somewhere between that $850,000 to $900,000 range, right? In a perfect world, I'd pay $800,000 or less for this property, right? I'm not sure that you could negotiate them down hard enough to pay that lower price. And I think that it's just a philosophy thing, but I think that being too obsessed with finding the absolute perfect deal is less valuable than finding a decent deal that matches your investing goals and has like really strong bones, right? So for me, this property has really strong bones, and if I overpay for it by a little bit, then true, I'm not being as efficient or as quick as I theoretically could be. But if I'm getting a really solid product that I believe in, then 5 years from now, and this is the thing, and this is true, Armando, from your own investments. You look back on any of them. 5 years ago, whatever price you paid was too high at the time, and today that it ultimately you could have paid more for them.
I see what you're saying. It's very valid. It's very valid. At the end of the day, it's the long game that we're playing. This isn't a fucking sprint. I'm just always like, man, I want the best value. I want the best deal. I want cash flow more out the gate. I want more equity built in out the gate. Mm-hmm. I'm just looking at this like I want to. It's interesting to put a deal on it. I think there is value there. I want to monitor it and see what happens, and keep it on the watch list. I really do like that like the way it was showing. It looks like, yeah, maybe it's outdated, but it's certainly livable. And I don't know if the pictures are from the vacant unit. Probably are.
Probably are. It's hard to say. There's definitely pictures from a unit that is occupied, though, as well as.
Is it? Okay.
I think there's a vacant one
and not vacant upon possession, right? Is that what they said? Like it's going to be vacant soon, or it's currently vacant?
No, there's one unit that is currently vacant. Apartment number 4.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that is currently vacant.
And I do want something purpose-built, man. It just makes things a lot easier. Everything
so much easier.
Already separated easily. Yeah, I like that one. There's that fourplex that I was telling you about before in Georgetown. Mm-hmm. We would have to it's retrofitted, right? So it's not purpose-built, but it's still very interesting to me, and I still need to go over there and knock on that guy's door. And I like the idea of maybe doing something that's closer to home, just because I feel like the rents are going to be stronger. It's probably easier to manage just because it's closer to home too. And it's similar thing. They listed for $1 million. The listing was terminated. It's one less unit, mind you, but the rents are higher in Georgetown, and I don't know, man. I think I like both of these deals. I do, but we definitely need to do something because I'm itchy. I'm very itchy. Vendor take back. That's the other thing I was trying to mention.
Yeah.
You think on a deal like that? Well, obviously we would benefit from one, right? Because I'm just thinking like I like the fact that it's so under rented. I'd rather have some seller financing to give us some time to get them out, right? Because it's always for me difficult to be like, yo, we can just get the tenants out, but I know it could feel like they could stay there for fucking 3 years.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why I'm like, I don't want to overpay.
Yeah.
Right? But then if we do the seller financing, maybe that would ease my mind and be like, all right, fuck, even if I pay $900, $925, but we got some seller financing, that deal looks good. Right? So, but Aaron, I'll tell you right now what's holding me back from, again, like doing any execution right now, like, and maybe you could talk to Natalie after. If we got to follow up with Jill and see how much these renovations cost, because I want to know how much capital we have on hand before I still go and look for other people's money.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
We really need to know that. So if you could just maybe ask her tomorrow if she can give him a call. I know she was busy doing report cards, but I think school is done now.
School is done, yeah.
Yeah, because I know if she's on title, that's the thing, right? Like I know I can finance the renovations and all of that.
Yep.
But it's a lot easier if she talks to him, right? Or if both of us could do the call together. And but I think we gotta really follow up on that because I'm hungry now, man. We need to eat. Elias here he's gotten some credit, and it's we have everything we need, right?
Congrats.
Like in terms of timing to do another deal. So I think it's time.
Yeah, absolutely. It is time, definitely, or will be soon. So definitely we need to get things lined up and arranged so that we're ready to go. And I think with a vendor take back loan, assuming that the trending continues, assuming we continue to see job losses and the economy continues to contract, and especially if interest rates continue to climb, then you're just eliminating buyers from the market, right? That's all that stuff is doing.
Yeah.
And so obviously as the demand for your product falls, you need to drop the prices to command the same amount of demand. And there's obviously a variety of ways to do that. One way to do that is obviously to offer credit, which is a way to make it cheaper in the short term, right? That's right.
More affordable.
So I think that you're going to see more sellers be willing to explore vendor take back with you in this current market condition than we were seeing before, right? Because they have less options.
100%, and that's why I mentioned it.
Yeah,
right? That's why I mentioned it. So let's do something. But I'm at work and I'm like fucking low thinker. I gotta go back. But let's talk more about this later.
Yeah, absolutely.
With Elias. Maybe we should have like a little phone call or a meeting or something like that and kind of just get our heads together. But please mention that to Natalie.
Okay.
And then I want to get these quotes together. You guys have a good day, man.
Thank you. You too.
Take care, Mom.
Everybody have a great week. Yeah, go ahead, Elias.
One question for me before I let you go as well. Purpose built. What can you remind me again what that means?
So there are houses that are retrofits, and they're not houses, usually they're apartments, but they're apartments that are purpose built. So purpose built is a property that from day one it was built as a building for multiple families to live in. Right, so we built an apartment building, whereas a retrofit is maybe like a house that was a single family house, but it's a nice big house. So they divided it into 2 units and made a duplex, or 3 units, they made a triplex, that kind of thing. So that's all purpose built is. It's something that was meant for what it's being used for.
Yeah.
Nobody changed anything about it. Yeah, and then purpose built are usually cheaper. Definitely. Right, not in terms of buying price, but in terms of management price, right? Because they were built with the idea that you were going to manage it as a business from day one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. See.
Whereas retrofits oftentimes are more difficult to maintain.
Yeah. Okay. I see. I'm just trying to picture in my head as far as why it's already built with that purpose, even if it wasn't at the beginning.
Yeah, so the reason why is, there's a variety of reasons why. One of them is like material choices. Like, for example, if you go into like a big apartment building, right? What's it made out of? It's made of like cinder block and like concrete and like really durable stuff, right?
Yeah.
When you go into a house, what's a house made of? House made of like wood and drywall and like much less durable stuff, right?
I see.
So the house just right off the jump is not made as well. It's not built to last as much, which is not to say, all these things can last for 100 years, right? But it's about how much you take care of them, right? The other thing with the purpose built is like the plumbing will be separate, the hydro will be separate. They'll have water tanks for each unit, et cetera, et cetera. So all of those things have been already thought about and engineered or designed to take care of the number of people who you're expecting to have in the building. So that's going to be good both for you in terms of being able to split up, electricity, water, et cetera, and for the tenants. And then also purpose built usually. So you'll see like a lot of apartment buildings, they don't have pitched roofs with shingles. They'll have a flat tar roof, right? Which is a better style of roof that lasts longer, right? You need to replace those roofs every 30 to 40 years rather than every 10 to 20, which you have to do with a pitched shingled roof, right? So you get a better roof that lasts longer, and also because there's no pitch in it, it's cheaper to construct. And so there's a whole bunch of just like small things that just make them cheaper to run.
I see.
Also, long term, when it comes to selling them, right? Investors prefer those types of properties to retrofitted homes, right? They'll command a higher valuation, dollar for dollar, because they're easier to run, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I see. No, thanks for that insight.
Of
Just wanted
course.
to know the difference.
Yeah, no, of course. So why we're here, right? You ask the questions,
Definitely.
get you the answers.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. You definitely what?
No, definitely. Yeah, should sit down whenever you guys let me know whenever you guys have to discuss. Like as Noah was saying,